Know this, it is the year 10,192. 2 film critics have just arrived and are traveling via sandworm across the Arrakis desert. They will pass by many amusement parks and tourist traps on their journey.
Where's that lady's voice coming from?
Don't fall, Shannon. Don't fall, Shannon. Keep your balance, Shannon. Oh, this worm is really stinky. What were we thinking coming here? What are you thinking, Tommy? What are you thinking?
$40 for a bottle of water? This place is a ripoff.
Hello and welcome to Random Movie Time. Today's feature is the 1984 science fiction epic Dune, directed by David Lynch, based on the book by Frank Herbert, and starring Kyle MacLachlan and Sean Young and Patrick Stewart. So this tells the story of a young man who is the son of a duke, and arriving on the desert planet Arrakis, also known as Dune, he eventually becomes a great messiah to the people, great war leader, and develops incredible psionic powers, changing the fate of the galaxy forever. Well, Shannon, what did you think of this movie?
I don't know what to say because I think this movie has been talked about a lot and there are a lot of naysayers, but it has become quite the cult movie now. There's quite a cult following for it. And so it's difficult for me to say if I liked it or not, because there are some things I like about it and there are some things that are obviously ridiculous. Overall, I'm not sure. That's the bottom line. So, it's interesting to think about the fact that David Lynch directed this film and he's not a science fiction fan. He doesn't like science fiction much. But you can see his stamp on this film. He was very disappointed, like he with the end product. He originally wanted to make it a trilogy, I think. And the studio was like, no, we can't do that. We have to make it in one film. And so, you know, the post-production, they fiddled around a lot with David Lynch's vision, and they kind of, you know, there are a lot of things in it that he's not very happy about with the finished product, and he went so far as to strike his name from a lot of the copies and things like that, to disassociate himself with the film. But there are definitely David Lynchian elements in this film. I mean, there's lots of surrealism and absurdity. So it's you can see his stamp. And interestingly enough, George Lucas approached David Lynch to direct Return of the Jedi, which he turned down, but he did Dune instead. But it's so funny because I see like some Star Wars design in this version of Dune. I see like there was a gate or something that was very familiar to me, and it was very Star Wars like. Giegerish. There's lots of Giegerish imagery. That's very interesting as well, the Giger influence there, which is funny because, I mean, Giger was working with Jodorowsky on his Dune project, which fell through, so there's a connection there too. And there's a lot of like kind of steampunky design, and so, you know, it's interesting. It's inconsistent, I think, when you're talking about like the cinematography and stuff like that. There were some really nice shots in there. There is some really beautiful shots, but there were some that just it just didn't all fit together seamlessly, which makes sense because they kind of chopped it up in post-production to make it as short as they could so they could release it as one big film. So there were many production problems with this film, which is why, partly why it seems a bit absurd. Of course, if anybody has seen the 1984 Dune version, or the David Lynch Dune version, you will probably remember those silly force shields that they or the shields they wear when they're fighting. And I mean, the ending was obviously a bit rushed. I mean, in the last 15 minutes, they're like, or maybe even half an hour or so, they're like, oh, we gotta wrap this up. So they kind of glossed over a lot of stuff and just smushed it all together. I mean, the movie doesn't really follow the novel very well, and I don't see how it could. First of all, David Lynch not being a sci-fi fan and not really knowing the story that much. And second of all, you can't do Dune in one movie. I mean, you can try. I mean, obviously, somebody tried. And another thing I have to mention is that, and I think many people who have talked about this film have brought this up, but it goes without saying, I think, that there is way too many voiceovers. Like, the whole film, half of the film is just people thinking. It's kind of silly. One of my favorite quotes, though, and this is a false quote because it sounds like it when Lady Jessica and her son are all bound up in the Harkonnen's helicopter or whatever, and they're like, and she's like trying to use the voice on one of the guards, and she's like, release my son, cut my son, that's what it was cut my son's buns. It sounded like she said buns, but she was saying bonds. It was so funny. Cut my son's buns. Anyway, but joking aside, a lot of good acting in this film. I wouldn't say... I mean, there were a couple of times where it was kind of like... bit over the top, but for the most part, I mean, there's some, great actors. Kyle MacLachlan, of course, is great, and... oh my god, Brad Dourif, and... wow, just like so many good actors in this film, and I think most of them did and of course Sir Patrick Stewart, although I don't know if he was a sir back then yet, but yeah, I mean, it was the acting was pretty good with some exceptions, but I loved seeing the actors, and there's no doubt that this film keeps my attention. I mean, it's not, there are a lot of, maybe because there are some laughably bad parts in it, but there are some really beautiful parts in it too, and I don't think it's a total write-off for sure. I think it's really entertaining, and I think it deserves cult status. I mean, even if it weren't David Lynch. But what do you think, Tommy?
Well, I've been trying to figure out that question for 40 years. I've been watching this movie for 40 years. Never paid money to see it. It's just, it's on TV quite a lot. Yeah, I mean, usually I love David Lynch. Obviously, he says he had a lot of studio interference with this one, so he sort of disowns it. But obviously, it has a lot of David Lynch flavor to it. I think the overall design of the movie is good, especially, the sets and the costumes, where it sort of breaks down and gets a little too weird for its own sake. I thought was, all of the weird little props and gadgets and doohickeys. They had this weird sort of, I don't know, kind of out of place steampunk vibe, which fits very well with David Lynch's vision, but it sort of brought you out of it because you couldn't believe that this was a movie set 10,000 years in the future. Everything just looked so clunky. That being said, the computers were well done because you had these computers with graphics that, like Paul's tablet, it didn't have pixels, like the letters weren't pixelated. And in those days, whenever they would show any computer on screen, even a computer that was supposed to be in the future, everything would be made with these really pixelated graphics. So actually, that's one thing that they got right, I think. Yeah, the acting was good. I think you see Kyle MacLachlan get better as the movie goes on. It was, I think, his first big movie, and he definitely blossomed into a great actor and maintained this friendship with David Lynch over the years, even though they both worked on this very troubled movie together. Somehow they maintained a bond. And yeah, it was great to see him developing into this great actor, with this very challenging role. Patrick Stewart was great. This was his first, I think, really big movie role. It's the first time I can remember seeing him. He did a lot of things, Shakespearean actor, and he'd been in, quite a few British movies, but this was like his first really high profile sort of A movie, as near as I can remember anyway. And it wasn't too long after that he got Star Trek, and then the rest is history. But this is interesting to see, an early science fiction role for him. It has too much voiceover for sure. They were trying to, I guess, give the movie some exposition that way. And the funny thing is, usually I don't like, who did the new Dune? Denis Villeneuve? Yeah. Usually I don't like Villeneuve's movies so much. Like, I really hated Blade Runner 2049, and I really didn't like Arrival very much. But his Dune was really, really good, and he was able to make an adventure that the whole audience could get into. I think that was the main problem with this movie. It would appeal to science fiction fans and people who knew the book, but just a casual movie fan would be completely lost. And that's one thing where Villeneuve's movie got it a lot better. It's like you can follow along with it. Just like Star Wars, Star Wars was able to appeal to a very general audience as well, but not this one. This is for a very specific niche audience, unfortunately, and you can't really make a big AAA movie out of that.
I think that maybe David Lynch approached it more as well. He approached it as David Lynch would, and he did it more. He's trying to do it more like an art film. Yeah. As opposed to a science fiction film. Right. And, it really didn't follow the story, the original story very well. And I think that was a big criticism from a lot of Dune fans.
Yeah, and if you're going to do this sort of epic story, that's, I think, when you sort of need the crowd-pleasing movie. I mean, I love Twin Peaks, but I like that, it's a very niche story. It's a weird story, and David Lynch's approach works well with that. But he was trying to translate somebody else's words into something that fit with his vision, and I think that's where the movie stumbled probably. But it's definitely a movie, like you said, that holds your attention. You can't stop thinking about it. I've never been able to stop thinking about it or quite get it out of my head because it's so striking. And I guess in the end, it is entertaining. It's not a movie that I ever feel like putting on. I'm like, oh, can't wait to watch some Dune today or anything like that. But when it is on, for better or for worse, you get drawn into it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and Sting. I forgot to mention Sting. He doesn't have a huge role, but he does it well. He has quite a presence in this film. One thing that I thought was too much was the when they were doing the folding space bit, when they were going from Calderon to Caladan to Arrakis, and they were doing the folding space bit, and it was just you didn't really need to spend that much time on it. I mean, you could have sacrificed that part for fitting more of the story in instead of just rushing it along. It was that part was a bit too much for me. It was like, you know, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right, so how many sandworms out of 5 would you give this one?
I will give it 4 sandworms out of 5. Yeah, I feel that for all its flaws and all its ridiculousness, it's a quirky, entertaining film. And I love David Lynch, and there's a lot of David Lynch in it. And despite all the production value and all that, I mean, I'm not sure most people would give it a 4 out of 5, but personally for me, I'll give it that. What about you?
I'll give it 2.5 sandworms out of 5, yeah. A light recommendation. It's definitely a movie you should see once just to experience it. But it's not terrifically entertaining, and it's not something that you'll want to return to over and over again. I don't think, anyway. But yeah, 2.5 sandworms out of 5. Well, I guess we hear some sandworms coming. We'd better activate a thumper and distract them. Run in the general direction of safety towards the Atreides base.
Yeah. Remember to run away off rhythm.
Yep. Do the special sand walk. All right. So we'll see you next time on Random Movie Time.